Voight losing to Reid would have been the best thing to happen for Chicago PD Season 13. Warning: spoilers for Chicago PD Season 12, Episode 22, Vows. Voight's team dodged a bullet at the end of Chicago PD Season 12, but Reid surviving instead would have benefited Season 13. The Chicago PD cast was utterly dismantled by Reid in Season 12's penultimate episode, necessitating a high-stakes follow-up. But when the credits rolled on the Chicago PD Season 12 finale, the circumstances didn't sit right. While Chapman is the only one who calls Voight out directly, the looks on everyone's faces upon hearing the news of Reid's death suggest virtually everybody on the team is silently aware of Voight's role in his murder. That could create problems in Chicago PD Season 13. However, things could have gone much differently if Reid remained on top. If there's one upside to Charlie Reid's death in Chicago PD, it's that the intelligence unit is able to continue operations as if they'd never been disbanded. Hank, Kim, and Dante have their badges back, while the rest of the team can return from their temporary patrol reassignments. Reid, after all, was the only one pushing for a disciplinary hearing. Unfortunately, shortcuts can often do more harm than good. And nothing makes that clearer than Nina's discussion with Voight at Kim and Adam's wedding. Chapman knows that Voight released Rennie and likely gave him Reid's location on the day of the shooting, allowing Rennie to get revenge on Reid for his father's murder. Hank killed Reid without pulling the trigger. Deputy Charlie Reid's death won't exactly go down in history as one of Chicago PD's saddest character exits, but Chapman's role as ASA prevents her from letting her personal feelings toward Voight stand in the way of justice. While Voight hasn't technically confessed to Nina about what he did, his silence in the wake of her accusations speaks volumes. Chapman can't take silence as a confession, but she can offer Rennie a deal with the state attorney's office in exchange for his deposition. Running the intelligence unit while under investigation for conspiracy to commit murder can't be the victory Hank wanted. And this hefty price for ending Reid's corruption could have been avoided in a much more thrilling way. Hank Voight might have a strong distaste for Reid's particular brand of corruption, but that doesn't mean he's always been the biggest fan of going by the book. In the Chicago PD Season 12 finale, Voight commands his team to dress in blackout gear and rob a drug den at gunpoint as part of their plan to lure out Reid. When this inevitably leads to Hank and Ruzick manhandling a suspect in a back room and threatening to beat him for information, longtime viewers might feel a tinge of familiarity. In the earlier seasons of Chicago PD, Voight and his team frequently operated in what could at best be called a morally gray area. At worst, they were outright vigilant. Aside from the fact that the intelligence unit could only conceivably get away with that method of doing things for so long, Chicago PD ultimately had to reassess Voight's methods thanks to real-world concerns about police conduct. Anyone who really wants to hate the police would consider good TV police work unbelievable, but the old method was problematic across the board. In clarifying why Chicago PD killed off Reid, showrunner Gwen Sagan explains that Reid had to die in part because the creative team didn't feel like his character could be redeemed. Had he lived, however, there's very little chance that Voight would have stood idly by to watch him turn Chicago into a lawless wasteland. And that could have proven exciting. Mellowing down the intelligence unit in response to real claims of police brutality was sensible, but watching Voight's team make morally questionable choices in the name of justice is a lot more compelling. Having Reid successfully disband the unit would have forced them to walk that angst-ridden path to awesome righteousness yet again if they wanted to bring Reid down. It also makes a lot more sense from a storytelling perspective. Ending Chicago PD Season 12 with the intelligence unit seemingly dismantled for good would have raised the stakes going into Season 13. to the point that everything would have felt like rising action until Reid was finally brought to justice. The ethical implications would be even more intense before the hearing leaves room for the possibility that intelligence might have come out of things just fine without resorting to having Reid murdered. By contrast, Reid winning at the end of Chicago PD Season 12 would have cast fewer doubts on the team's next moves. And this would have been the case whether they resorted to vigilantism or not. Rusick and Burgess could have had one of the best won Chicago weddings ever. But were she not potentially set up to replace Reid as Voight's next antagonist, Chapman could have been a useful ally in helping the intelligence unit regain their reputation lawfully. Obviously, the three characters who lost their badges would have needed to join the action somehow to keep the series interesting, meaning that it would have been exceptionally difficult to write Chicago PD Season 13 in a way that didn't result in vigilant justice to at least some degree. But that's not what would have made Reid's victory most compelling. Regardless of whether they went outside the law, Voight's team being forced to fight for their unit would have left no doubt they truly earned their victory. And forcing them to find a way of doing that without losing Chapman's support could have raised the tension significantly. It's always more compelling to see characters win when the odds seem insurmountable. With Voight and Chapman potentially facing off on the issue of what constitutes true justice, there's still a chance for Chicago PD to pit the unit against seemingly impossible odds. Nonetheless, it's a shame the series passed up the opportunity to let us see them climb back to their feet after the monumental fall Reid had in store for them. It was the kind of matchup Chicago never expected, and Chicago PD never dared to explore. Hank Voight versus Samantha Reid. Not a battle of fists or gunfire, but a clash of leadership styles, philosophies, and deep-rooted justice ideologies. Voight, the grizzled, streetwise veteran with a bulletproof reputation and a taste for bending the rules. Reid, the sharp, calculated reformer from the new generation, preaching accountability, community connection, and transparency. In a surprising storyline twist the show never took, but absolutely should have. Voight losing to Reid wouldn't have been the end of intelligence. It would have been its rebirth. Picture it. A civilian oversight board, tired of Voight's unchecked authority, brings in Samantha Reid as interim chief of intelligence while Voight is suspended pending an investigation. She's everything Voight's not: composed, careful, and calculated, with degrees from Harvard and real-world time in community programs. Her presence would have sent ripples through the precinct. Rusick and Atwater questioning her tactics. Burgess trying to give her a fair shot. Upton, torn between loyalty to Voight and curiosity about a different way of doing things. It wouldn't have to be some melodramatic downfall. Voight's loss could be a slow, symbolic one, the realization that his way no longer rules the streets, that his team is adapting without him, and that perhaps, just perhaps, the world is ready to move forward. That kind of shift wouldn't just elevate the storytelling, it would have humanized Voight in ways the show has resisted for years. The best part, it would have sparked actual growth for the entire intelligence unit. Under Reid, cases would have taken a different turn. Instead of brutal interrogations in dimly lit warehouses, we'd see negotiation tactics, the use of community informants, and, gasp, real accountability. Some viewers would have hated it at first. It's not gritty anymore. They'd cry. But that's exactly why it would have worked. The show thrives when it challenges its characters, and nothing would push them more than trying to solve cases in a world where shortcuts aren't an option. Reid would have been tested too. She'd quickly realized Chicago isn't a classroom, it's a battlefield. Her clean methods would occasionally fail, and she'd have to confront whether her high ideals hold up when innocent lives are on the line. It would create the perfect storm: Two leaders who are fundamentally different, but both right in their own ways. By the time Voight returns, a few episodes later, everything is different. Intelligence has solved high-profile cases without him. The city board considers making Reid permanent. And Voight, for the first time in his hardened career, starts to question whether he's the only one who can lead.